Hey, Marv.
Hey, Rab, how are you?
Good, good. How are you doing?
Good. Everybody good?
Yeah, yeah. Thank God. Thank God.
Good.
Thank you for the your advice there.
Oh, yeah, I just want you to, yeah, I think just to write a short little note would be
Yeah.
helpful because I just think that's an old form and hasn't been updated for this situation. But
So I just started recording the the Alter Rebbe yesterday and the day before. He basically shared a metaphor. He says, "Can you imagine a king or a queen um, leaving the royal palace and the royal opulence and leaving all the servants and noblemen, etc., and going into the countryside and meeting this poor commoner and embracing the commoner and breaking bread with the commoner and just spending time and playing with the commoner's kids, etc." He says the commoner would be so full of love. The commoner would just be so appreciative and say, "Wow, I'm wowed." So he said, this is so the past couple of days, he's saying that essentially that's what God has done. God, he left his upper worlds, he left the lower worlds, he left the angels and ministering angels and archangels, and he left everything and everyone. And he came down to this lowest world, and he stepped into Egypt, which is the most sexually depraved, um, at that time, and environment, and it was full of tumor, impurity, and idol worship, and he embraced the Hebrews, he embraced the Jew, and he says so. Just think about how much love we should have for God, that he did that, and that God chose us, and he could have chosen anything. He could have been quite content with the angels that he created and the ministering angels who he created. It would have been just amazing. He doesn't even need the angels for that matter. But the fact that he chose us and he's willing to come to the lowest world, right? Asiya of Asiya, right? The physical world of Asiya, which is the lowest part, and and he came and he breaks bread. He says, of course we should love him, and that's how he went on for the past few days. However, in today's Tanya, the way the Rebbe explains today's Tanya is basically the Alter Rebbe is answering a question, and the question is a known question. The question is, the Hebrews in Egypt witnessed God. They witnessed God coming down all the way from above down. I am not an angel. I am not an archangel, right? And he took us out of the nethermost level, right, in Egypt, and he led us into his innermost sanctuary, the receiving of the Torah, etc. And we can attach ourselves to him. He says, but the you know, so of course that was like looking in a mirror. When they saw God coming at you with a big smile and a hug, of course you'll hug back. He says, but here, we haven't had this connection with God, so to speak, for 3,000 years. So the crux of today's Tanya is first of all, we should still love him because he did take us out of Egypt, and if God didn't, we would still be slaves in Egypt. And secondly is, every single day, we actually can transcend our miserable selves, as the Alter Rebbe continues. So he begins, V'hinei, in every generation, we read this in the Haggadah, B'chol davar dor, in every single generation, every single day, a person is obligated to view themselves as if they left Egypt. Right? So Egypt is not only a geographical space, but Egypt is a state of mind, right? Or a state of spirituality, as he explains here. And this refers to the soul being released from the confinement of the serpent's skin. So the body is a source of confinement for the soul. And the body derives its life force from klippa. It may be noga, so it's not all bad, but klippa is still antithetical to godliness. It obscures godliness anyway. And that's why it's called the serpent skin. So he says every single day, a person is obligated. He says, and how do we do that? So he says a person is obligated to leave. I'm jumping too fast. The person is obligated to leave the serpent skin and be absorbed into Hashem's light through studying Torah and through doing mitzvahs. As he said, he discussed yesterday, when a person studies and when a person does a mitzvah, you are totally absorbed in God's light, and you're elevated into holiness, and you you become one with God, because it's God's Torah is God's will, God's wisdom. But here today he adds a factor, and he says it is especially so when we say the Shema. Because what is the Shema? The Shema begins, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." So first, let's get that clear. There's one God. There's not a dualism. There's no idolatry. We accept God as the only God and the only creative force. Secondly, the first paragraph of the Shema is accepting the yoke of heaven, right? And I'll love God, and I'll teach my kids that the God is only one God, and I will remind myself wherever I go, whatever I do, that I accept God as Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So he says that when a person says the Shema, and when they draw upon themselves the yoke of heaven, that basically I hereby coronate God daily, right? And by doing that, he says you draw down God's unity when you say Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and you become absorbed right then and there into God's unity, and you leave your mundane essence. So when you say Shema specifically at that moment, it's very precious moments, you become united with God. And he says, and as we explained the other day, that just like in the Amidah we say Elokei Avram, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, is just because they made sure that they were united with God all the time. That's why God said, I'm your God. And God attested to that fact. So too, when we say Hashem Elokeinu, the Lord our God, he says we are united with God. He said the difference between Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and Moshe, and David, and Aaron, and other tzaddikim, is that Abraham and the aforementioned and more, what they did is they gained it. They were able to unite with God by their dedication. They were able to unite with God by their constant upswing. They were holy the entire time. In fact, they're called chariots, right? As we explained, a chariot has no independent will. A chariot is wherever the horse goes, the chariot follows. So they're called the chariot. The patriarchs and matriarchs, they were chariots. And so we may not be chariots, but at certain points we can get to the level of Abraham and unite with God and leave our mundane essence. So here's the difference. Abraham and the rest of the righteous people, they worked on it till they became united with God. But for us, God gave it to us as an inheritance because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah's sacrifice, because of what they stood for, and how they shepherded the Jewish people into a nation. God told Abraham, I'm going to make your people into mine. So God said that you worked on it. The rest of them, I'm going to give them a gift. And the gift is an inheritance that he's given us, which is the Torah. And in the Torah, God has clothed his will and his wisdom, which are united with his essence. And therefore, when we say the Shema, when we do a mitzvah, when we study Torah, it's as if we are embracing God, right? So we're embracing God at that very moment, right? Because God and Torah are one. In general, they say that there's that God. This is what it says in the Kabbalah, that God, Torah, and Israelites are actually one entity. Now they've been divided into what looks like separate entities, but they're really one. But how do we become one? When we unite with God. How do we unite with God? By studying the Torah. The Torah was given as a gift, as a response to say, Abraham, I'm going to choose your people because of what you've done. Before Abraham, the mission to bring godliness into the world was universal, right? Adam had the mission, Noah had the mission, right? Methuselah had the mission, etc., etc. Hanoch, had the mission. Once he stepped up to the plate, God told him, and we see it in the Torah, that I choose you. You chose me, and therefore I choose you. And the rest, as I say, is history. So what we've done is God gave us a gift that allowed us to leave our mundane existence. And that gift is the Torah. In the Torah is the Shema. So the Shema is every part of Torah is holy, but Shema allows us at that moment to be totally united with God and removed from our mundane existence. And then he goes into a little grammar. And he says, and that is the meaning of what we recite. We say it by Kiddush on the holidays, that God, when every holiday, so Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, you don't make Kiddush and Yom Kippur, and Shemini Atzeres, Simchat Torah, etc., etc. What do we say? Vatiten lanu Hashem Elokeinu bi'ahava. God gave us this mitzvah bi'ahava. Because of God, because of his great love for us, he gave us the gift that we could be united with him, his Torah. Part of his, and we recognize it by the holidays. Passover, wow, we became a nation. It took us out of Egypt. Shavuot, wow, God gave us the Torah. Sukkot, right, Rosh Hashanah, God gives us a good year, right? Sukkot, God protects us from the elements and from enemies. Simchas Torah, we celebrate that we have studied and we commit to study more. And there's another verse which is also in the Amidah. Ki ba'or panecha natata lanu Hashem Elokeinu. For the light of your countenance have you given us, O Lord our God. Once again, given us. It's a gift. So, because we receive this gift, and he gave us a gift with the ability to unite with him. So, it's not solely dependent on our spiritual service. But rather, we have it. We have this gift. So it's not as if we have to earn the gift, right? The difference between a gift, by the way, and inheritance is really not earned, right? Inheritance, great Aunt Becky passes away, and then you find out a couple of weeks later that you're in the will. Wow, right? A gift is where you may have to work for it or not. You may have to be kind to the person, deserve it, etc. But a Yerusha is you don't necessarily have to be deserving. It's just that this is what Aunt Becky wanted to do. So we are deserving strictly because of the patriarchs. God said, "I'm choosing you, and therefore I'm choosing them." So he says, if you think about it, and this is his point, he says, there is no obstacle. There is no obstacle for the Jew to be able to unite with God. The only thing that's in the way is your will. Do you really want it? So God forbid a person doesn't want it. Even now, elsewhere he says internally everybody wants to, right? Internally, deep part of us, everybody wants to. But he says if you have a person, God forbid, that either doesn't comprehend or wasn't inculcated properly or doesn't fully, wasn't brought up with it, or it's just doesn't resonate. You know, maybe they're a super scientist and their brain doesn't work that way. So he says, so they may have a little trouble with this. He says, but all you have to do is say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and you are united with God. Unless you say, nope, I don't want to be united. But as soon as you're willing to be united with God, we're not even talking about a deep understanding or comprehension, just the idea that yes, I want to be connected with God and I don't want to be severed. And therefore I'm going to say the Shema. As soon as you say the Shema, and it's with a willingness, he says immediately, those are the words he says here in Tanya, immediate, miyad, mamshich Allah v'lakusa yizbar, he's able to draw down godliness. And he says, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He says immediately and automatically, the soul and God are united, and one spirit leads to another spirit. So he's able to cleave to God. And he says, and that spiritually is called going out of Egypt. So Egypt is when you're stuck in your mundane bubble. Right? Egypt is where you're thinking about your problems. Egypt is thinking about your livelihood, the stock market, right? And once again, there were parts of Egypt that were Goshen that weren't so bad. You know, then there's levels of Egypt that are really impure. But Egypt is also, Egypt could be, by the way, is that when a person, and the Torah addresses this in Deuteronomy, the Torah says a person should never say, a wealthy person should never say, or a successful person should never say, look what I did, right? My prowess, the work of my hands, my brain, my hard work. A person should never say that, because it's not giving credit where credit is due, that God blessed you. So he says, but the when you say Shema, you're automatically connected with God with a unity, and that is called leaving Egypt. Right? Because when you say the Shema and you say it with a willingness, you're not thinking about the stock market. You're thinking about one thing. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and I love him. So he says, at that moment, you leave Egypt. And he says, and it is that for that very reason. He says, if you take a look, there's 3 paragraphs of the Shema, right? The first paragraph is you accept the yoke of heaven. I accept that there's a God. Shema Yisrael. Right, and that's why, by the way, when Hannah and her sons, right, they were asked to bow down to an idol, they said Shema, and they jumped off the roof, because they said, you know what, I'm not denouncing God. In fact, my last words that emits from my mouth are going to be acceptance of God. And so too in the Spanish Inquisition, the last words that they said was the Shema, to show they're not denouncing God. So the first paragraph of the Shema is accepting the yoke of heaven. There is a God, and there's only one God, right? It's probably the most important thing that you can say and believe. The second paragraph of the Shema is that, okay, so now I've accepted God, I got to keep his mitzvahs. So that's called the yoke of mitzvahs. And then comes the third paragraph of the Shema, which somehow doesn't make sense. You talk about that God took you out of Egypt. So some commentaries explain, which is the Alter Rebbe doesn't explain that like that. The Alter Rebbe goes a drop deeper. Some commentaries explain is that the first paragraph is the yoke of heaven. Second paragraph is the yoke of mitzvahs. And the third paragraph is to show that God is an involved God. That God he goes to Egypt, he takes you out, he didn't just make you and move on, but rather he's very cognizant of what's going on in the world. The Alter Rebbe explains it this way: you accept God, you accept the mitzvahs, that is going out of Egypt. So if you're going out of Egypt, you may as well recite about going out of Egypt because you just went out of Egypt. Right? By saying the Shema and Vahafta, and by saying Vahaya, the second paragraph, right? That is leaving your physical, mundane, corporeal, materialistic, physical grossness of oneself and extending it to something greater. He says, so that is going out of Egypt. So because we're going out of Egypt, let's celebrate and say, speak to the, right, and I'm the Lord that took you out of Egypt, etc., etc. So he says it's really one thing. Recalling the Exodus and saying the Shema and recalling the Exodus is it happens simultaneously. And he says, and if you think about it, what are the very last words of the paragraph of the third paragraph? Ani Adonai Elohechem Emes. I am the Lord your God, right? So it all connects. He says that through the Exodus, one ensures that God becomes his God by achieving total unification with him. So you want an Exodus? Yeah, you can have an Exodus. And it's explained, by the way, that anytime a person resolves, just parenthetically, right? We're just moving on something. Anytime a person resolves that I'm no longer going to be, for example, evicted, I'm no longer going to be depressed, I'm no longer going to allow this to go on, this negative, whatever negative is going on, is you're also going out of Egypt. Right? Because you're putting a stop to negativity. So Egypt could mean a lot of things. If we narrow it down here specifically, he says going out of Egypt is where you move beyond yourself. Right? That you are a cog in the wheel and God is your master, God is your God. And he says, and that is Egypt. So therefore, Egypt is not just an historical event. It's not something that happened, 3,340 years ago, right? We're in Egypt every day. Every single day we're in Egypt. And we get out of Egypt through accepting God's oneness and studying Torah, doing mitzvahs, especially when we say the Shema. So the fact that we say the Shema, we're obligated to say the Shema twice a day makes sense, because basically you check in the morning, and you check in at night, and you make sure that you don't spend more than 12 hours in Egypt, right? You don't want to get immersed, you don't want to get enmeshed in Egypt. You want to be able to get out. So it's almost like every time the pond is about to freeze over, you break it. And if you do that every day, it won't freeze over, right? So too, you don't want to stay in, you don't want to get mired in the muck of Egypt. So you say the Shema twice a day, you do mitzvahs every day, you daven, you study Torah. All this assures that life just doesn't revolve around your life, and if it's good, then you can lead a happy life. But if it's not good, then it can be a sad life. So therefore, you just pull out of it and say, God, broad shoulders, you are my God, and I accept you as the master of the world. That is on one foot today's Tanya. It's a very, very powerful Tanya. And do we have any questions? I don't know if everybody's muted or not, but let me check. Unmute all. Do we have any questions?
Rabbi, the expression Hashem Echad U'Shemo Echad,
right,
very similar, right?
Yeah. So Hashem Echad U'Shemo Echad is because they don't want people to think that there's an Adonai and then there's Elohim and then there's an El, and then there's a Tzvaot. So Hashem Echad Shmo Echad. It's all one thing. It's just one is the God that transcends created beings. One is the Hashem Elohim is the how he manifests here. Then there's the God of protection, etc.
Which chapter in Tanya is this taken from?
So this chapter is chapter 47 in the compilation. So this is chapter 47 today, part of 47. So it was 45, 46, and then it built to this to say that we absolutely can have a relationship with God, and it's not that that happened so many years ago, right? But rather it can happen today. Our personal and communal, for that matter, exodus. So
tomorrow
sorry,
tomorrow are you having any classes, or is this going to be the Kabbalah Shabbat?
So I'm not sure about tomorrow. I didn't plan it yet, but if there is, I'll let everybody know via the WhatsApp page. So just to let you know that tonight, thank you, Robin. Tonight begins what we call Passover the second, right? Pesach Sheni. And it's a beautiful concept. We don't say Tachnon tomorrow, but it's a beautiful concept. The Torah tells us in Numbers that there were people who were carrying Joseph's bones, and because they were impure, they could not eat from that. On the 1 year anniversary, of the Exodus, they couldn't make the Paschal lamb because they were impure. And God said, you have to be pure to have the Paschal sacrifice. So they turned to God. They turned to Moshe, and they said to Moshe, we're carrying bones. We did a mitzvah. Why should we lose out? Moshe turned to God, and Moshe said that, and God said to Moshe, they're right. What we're going to do from now on is exactly 30 days after Pesach, we're going to have something called Pesach Sheni. And that is that anybody that could not bring a sacrifice on the first Pesach, because they couldn't, not because they wouldn't refuse, lazy, but they couldn't. They were impure. They lived too far away. They were, under the weather, whatever. So they have an ability to do it exactly 30 days later. So the Rebbe, in one of his talks, he says, what a brilliant concept. And what we learn from here is that it's never too late. It's never too late to catch up, right? Judaism allows U-turns. We're going backwards. You can bring the Paschal sacrifice, but it's not Passover. Never mind. Anyone can make up anything. And the custom tomorrow is we don't have Paschal lamb or things like that, but there is a custom that we do eat matzah. You can eat it with your bagel if you want. You can put matzah in between. You make a matzah bagel sandwich. But we do eat matzah to commemorate that it's Passover the second, and it's considered a minor holiday. But what a beautiful concept that it's never too late to learn. It's never too late to take on a mitzvah. It's never too late, to do anything godly. So if anybody needs matzah, I have matzah here. Robin says she has matzah, but plenty of matzah here. So that's the idea of Pesach Sheni, of Passover. It sounds like it sounds like a very Anglo-Saxon name, Passover the second, but it's good. It's Pesach Sheni, and amazing concept. All right. Unless there's no more questions, a good night.
Yashikar.
God bless. I'll call you in a second.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bless you
Take
too.
care.
Bye-bye.
Oh, and Shabbat Shalom.